Last year, when I was on stage for the same event, we talked about how our cities are shifting, they're transforming, and for the first time in 140 years, the functions of our cities are changing. The idea that you have to come to a city or to an urban core to find jobs and opportunities is not necessarily there. It's not an absolute thing anymore. We also talked about interest rates and how interest rates are inching upwards. And we sort of thought that they're going to come back down for some reason, and that didn't happen either. And what we soon found out, everybody was planning to be flat for 2023, and transactions came to a screeching halt. And what we found out was that there is no such thing as flat. You're either up or you're down. And we found out that, obviously, because transactions were so low, it was a down year for the city. And, these are the cards that we're dealing with now. Today's reality that we're dealing with now is that interest rates are probably going to remain at these levels, right? We still don't know what to do with, hundreds of millions of square feet of commercial office space. That still remains to be seen. We have some experts today who are going to talk about that. And so where does that leave us? Last week, I met with Howard Lutnick, who is the longest running CEO of the Wall Street Bank. He also happens to be the chairman of Newmark. And his thinking is that in uncertainty, there's opportunity. And I asked him, I was like, why are you doubling down on a commercial brokerage firm now, where there's so many unanswered questions? And his response was that in the next 5 years, we're going to see the largest transfer of assets and wealth. And the people who are part of that ecosystem, the brokers, the lenders, the investors, the people who are part of that, they stand to make a tremendous fortune, which is a great thing. But for New York City, we have other issues too. This is a great picture. I didn't notice that. It's in front of me here. So, in New York City, another thing we talked about was that, politically, we're facing a lot of challenges. We still have a long ways to go to convince our officials, our politicians, the people who are responsible for our tax dollars, that the real estate industry accounts for 40% of the revenues of the city. But we don't get that love back from the city or the state. And part of that has to do with our involvement. Part of that has to do with the industry's involvement. For a long time, we let government do what government needed to do. And it turns out that they don't always make the right decisions. And it's hurt the city in a tremendous way. We're losing tens of billions of dollars to other states. We're losing tax bases and tax revenue, and it's hurting us in a bad way. And that's why I wanted to have a government official come here today, somebody who is benefiting from the missteps of our government in New York. And I wanted to hear from him what he thinks they're doing right where we're missing out on. You could say he was sort of groomed to always be in this position. His father was the mayor of Miami, and now he is the face of Miami, and he's loving it, as you can see from all of his TV appearances. And the idea that he's come to the Lion's Den here in New York from Miami. This is very brave. I don't think the New York of the 70s would have accepted it. But here we are today. Please put your hands together for the mayor of Miami, Mayor Francis Suarez. Thank you for coming up.
You're welcome.
You didn't get robbed on the way over here, did you?
I did not.
You're good. So, Mayor Suarez, you're benefiting from billions of dollars that have left New York. And we've lost 550,000 people since the start of COVID. A lot of them obviously have come to Florida and Miami. You've taken some of our biggest developers, Steve Witkoff, Steve Ross, Mickey Naftali, the list goes on, who are all moved down there basically, and they're also developing and running businesses there. What do you think you guys are doing that we're not doing here that's drawing all of that investment money out of New York and into Florida?
First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here. This is an incredible crowd. Look at that, standing room only. I think what fundamentally what we do, and the principle of what we do is we put our customer first, our resident first. And so the way that we build our ecosystem is actually quite simple. The formula for success, and I was blessed to be president of all the mayors in the United States, and some of them would come up to me and say, hey, how is it that you are doing this Miami miracle? I said, we do three things, and we do three things well, and it's all we focus on. We keep taxes low, we keep people safe, and we lean into innovation. That's all we do. So I lowered taxes to the lowest level in history, and guess what happened? We had unprecedented growth, 14% growth last year alone. So it turns out there is a correlation between good tax policy and growth. When you have a thriving economy, what happens? People don't commit crime. So last year, in 2023, we had a lower homicide rate than in 1947 when we started recording homicides, and we had a third of the population in 1947 than we had last year in 2023. In 1947, we had 32 homicides. Last year, we had 31. Okay? And if you think Miami was always that way, I can tell you it was not. In 1980, we had 220. So we went from 220 to 31, the lowest per capita in our history last year.
And that's for relatively a small city, right? I mean, you're roughly around 500,000 people.
About 500,000 or 600,000. The MSA is about 3 million. But listen, and then we leaned into innovation. You know, we created and continue to understand that our biggest asset is not our government. Our biggest asset is all of you, the people that make up the city, the people that create the ecosystem that create prosperity in the city. So we had the lowest unemployment in America, 1.4%, so 98.6% of people are working. We had the highest wage growth in America, so people are prospering more than ever. And then we have reduced homelessness to about 630 unsheltered homeless in our entire city, and we want to be the first major American city to have zero homeless.
And, you know, you're obviously drawing a lot of people, you know, down to Miami, which is a great thing. But, you know, I was looking at the statistic that 93% of condos that sold down there above $2,000 a square foot were all cash deals. Is there a fear that you're sort of pushing out, you know, Miamians and allowing for sort of the wealthy and the, you know, the super rich to come down there? Is that a good thing, or?
No, look, I think affordable housing is a challenge across America, right? I think every single urban population in America, New York, San Francisco, Dallas, Austin, every single major city has seen massive inflationary increases in prices, particularly in the rental market. For us, the good news is there are two things that we can do that a lot of other cities cannot do. One is we can grow, we can supply. We have the ability to grow 10x, 10 times larger physically than what we are. That's the delta between our zoning code, which is a form-based, box-based code, and our actual buildings. So there's a 10-to-1 multiple in growth. The second thing that we do is we do affordable housing, but we do it maybe a little differently than everybody else. We do it as public-private partnerships. So it's a carrot approach. So for every dollar, hey Mitch, how are you? For every dollar that we put in, in our last cycle, we had $50 million invested. We got $2 billion of product, a 20-to-1 ratio of public dollars to private dollars. So it's a tremendous amount of leverage. With rates going up, that leverage is going to go down without a doubt. But it's still, even if it's 10-to-1, for every dollar you invest, if you get $10 in the capital stock from banks and equity and other governments putting in money or land, you're still doing phenomenally well. So, you know, we're going to continue to build both affordable housing.
I wanted Mayor Adams to be here to, you know, have a conversation with him. He chose not to be here today. So I don't want you, I'm not going to let you sit up here and just gloat. Okay, so you guys also have some challenges.
I take every opportunity to gloat.
You guys have some challenges too, right? It's not all roses and, you know, perfumes. So your infrastructure, can it handle the growth that it's facing? Right now, you guys are known for your events. You know, now you recently had the F1, you have Art Basel, you have the Yacht Show, the Real Deal, Miami Forum.
Yeah.
So the infrastructure, when you do have those kind of events, it draws a lot of people in there. The traffic becomes a standstill. You really don't have public transportation. And you're talking about growing 10x. How can you sustain that? I mean, to change the infrastructure, it's going to require a lot of money and it's going to require a lot of work. That's really, are you guys planning? Do you have any plans for that?
Well, I mean, it's a good question and it's the right question, right? When you think about New York City, they just did the Second Avenue line at a cost of $2 billion a mile. That is not feasible for Miami, right? We have to start looking at next generation technology. So we are looking very closely at eVTOL companies like Archer and Joby, which are urban air mobility companies. And which requires a lot less expenditure on the capital side. And obviously it's next generation technology. And we're also looking at things like what Elon is doing in Las Vegas with the boring company. He does boring tunnels that are $10 million a mile as opposed to $2 billion a mile. So if you just think of the order of magnitude savings, you can build a comprehensive underground system in Miami for the same amount of money that you do 1 mile of underground in New York City.
There's a study from University of Miami came out that said in the next 10 years, the coastal areas of Miami are going to see serious migration because water is rising. That is a matter of fact. But somehow when I speak to developers and politicians from Florida, they sort of wave it off and they're like, they've been talking about this forever. But this is a factual thing. And it's a study from the University of Miami.
That's probably the second thing that, most common thing that people will ask me about after traffic. The third one being sort of how do you continue to educate in education as sort of a third pain point, or affordable housing interchangeably. But in terms of resiliency, you would be surprised to know two facts that I think are important. Number one is we didn't just put our head in the sand and pretend like it doesn't exist. We have addressed the issue head on. We have a Miami Forever bond, so we borrowed money, something that our residents don't like to do, which is tax themselves. In this particular case, it was voter approved. And we have invested hundreds of millions of dollars on making our city more resilient. What has been the impact? Well, the impact has been that FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency of the federal government, has actually downgraded Miami's flood risk. So it doesn't get out there very much, which is why I take every opportunity, Amir, to come to forums like this, because I have a feeling that New York is trying to brand that we're going to be underwater, right? So, I mean, it's the only thing they have is a competitive advantage argument, right? So that's what they have to go with. The fact is twofold. Number one, we've actually reduced our flood risk profile based on our investments. So flood premiums have actually gone down by 8% in Miami. Secondly, and this is probably shocking to many of you in the audience, we've actually suffered less hurricane damage than New York City since Sandy. So most people don't realize that, they don't understand that. And Miami, because we have been victims, if you will, or subjected to climatic events, we have systematically over time invested in our infrastructure, created stronger building codes so that we are less vulnerable than even New York City, for example, against a climatic event, a big hurricane.
But, the insurance companies seem to not to agree with you, right? You had the top 25 largest insurance companies leave the state of Florida because they don't want to be responsible for that change.
Yeah, and remember when you think about insurance, it's pooled risk, right? And when you see what happened in the Gulf Coast of Florida just a couple of years ago, you're seeing that not every part of the state is as resilient as Miami is. So we're, I hate to say the beneficiary of, but when Andrew hit in 1992, Andrew decimated a Homestead and Florida City, two cities that are in the southern part of the county. The consequence of that was that we decided to build much, much more fortified. City Hall, where I work every single day, was built in the 1930s, but it's like a bunker, right? We have impact windows on all the glass, and we do it in a way that preserves the historic character of the building. So all of our buildings now, by mandate, by law, are built to a certain standard of resiliency that unfortunately hasn't completely permeated throughout the state. And so when you pool risk, you're pooling risk from areas that are very, very vulnerable, and that's what drives cost.
But it's still making it very difficult to do closings because people can't get insurance for their mortgages and things like that. Is there anything you can do as a state or as a city to, force the insurance companies that do any business with the state to stay there and provide insurance for home ownership?
Yeah, like you said, it's a state issue, and it is an issue. And I think buying insurance across state lines is pooling risk over a larger area is one idea. Not allowing insurance companies to cherry pick is another, as you've sort of kind of intimated. But our values are up significantly, 14%. So we're growing transactional volume despite a very high interest rate environment has been growing steadily in the city, much more than any other city, I think, in America. So look, I think we've been as recession-proof as any city in America.
So if you were governor, Mayor Suarez, what would you do? What are some of the things that you would sort of do differently if you were running the state?
Well, I'm a uniter. And so for me, I think I wouldn't want to do anything as governor that would push people out of my state. So that would be something that I would focus on. I think the second thing I would focus on is education. We live in a world that is more disruptive than ever, and the economy is going to be more knowledge-based and experiential than ever. And so for me, the best way to build an ecosystem, whether it's a city, a state, or a country, is to focus on its people and giving them the strongest, most powerful weapon for democratizing prosperity, which is education. So I would want Florida to be number one in education in the country.
But you've had challenges with getting schools to come down there. I know Avenues was supposed to open up in Miami, and they decided to pull back. And what was the reason for that?
I would love to know. I would love.
It seemed like their audience is down there, so
I don't know. I haven't spoke to the Avenues guys in a while. I know that they have corporate issues that are beyond just the decision. But listen, we have a real need for more supply, right? Particularly at that high-end level, because we're constantly I run into people all the time that are telling me how hard it is to get their children in. I even had somebody the other day tell me that they want to move in, but they're concerned about getting their children into school. So there's definitely a demand, without a doubt. What happened with Avenues, that they bought a property for $50 million and haven't developed it? I have no idea why they would do that, but I'm sure there are many, many, many people in our community that would love to buy that property from them and convert it into a school.
It's do you feel that the culture of Miami is changing? Because you have pretty much every restaurant in New York is now down in Miami, and if you come east of Calle Ocho, which is where the Cuban neighborhood is, it's become incredibly very white, and it's very wealthy crowd, and it's not the normal Miami that people used to know from 15 or even 20 years ago. Do you feel like that change is, it's culturally changing Miami?
Miami is two things. One, it's a melting pot. So we're constantly accepting and embracing new people. 70% of the people that live in Miami were not born in Miami. I'm actually the exception. I was the first mayor of Miami in its history since 1896 that was born in the city. So I'm an anomaly. So I think that's...
Your father was an immigrant.
My father came from Cuba at 12 years old. He was the first Cuban mayor of Miami in 1985. So I think that's part of who we are. I think the second part is those new people are continuously coming from different places, right? So maybe prior to this moment, you were seeing a lot of people from South America and Europe. Now you're starting to see interest, obviously, from other parts of the U.S., New York, Chicago, California, and increasingly from the Middle East. You're seeing a lot of interest from Israel, a lot of interest from some of the Arab countries, UAE, Saudi, etc. They're really focused on the city, and they all have direct flights. By the way, we have direct flights to basically everywhere in the Middle East now. And I think the next challenge for the city is how do we get into Asia, right, in Korea and Japan, and how do we start getting from those places? And I do think direct flights to those places would be very, very important.
Do you go and advocate in those countries? Do you go and brand the city?
Absolutely. And I did it not just as mayor of Miami, but I also did it as president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. I really felt that my role as a leader for this country was to go out there and tell the story of American prosperity, of what has made this country so unique, so special, and such a beacon of hope across the world. So I do it with a lot of joy. I do it at a huge sacrifice of time with my family. I'm not with my family today. I was at Milken speaking yesterday, so I was in LA. So it's a big sacrifice for me. I have a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old, a 10-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl. And I just can't wait to get home tonight to give them a hug and a kiss.
So you're seeing a lot of protests that are happening in New York right now. And you have a lot of universities and colleges in Miami. Why do you think that we're not seeing the same sort of protests that are happening here down in Miami?
I think there's two reasons. I think the first reason is we, on this issue, have been very morally clear from our perspective. So the minute that the attacks happened on October 7th, from that moment forward, we flew the Israeli flag half-mast in front of City Hall. So, yeah. And I think the second reason is we have a zero tolerance policy. You know, we're a law and order city. And we believe, yeah. So as far as I know, we had one protest with 75 protesters. 7 of them tried to block traffic. We arrested them, and that was the end of the disturbance. Yeah.
And you know, right now there's this sort of a glut of building in Miami. Like you have 3 million square feet of office space that's been built that there's no leases for. And then there's obviously a lot of rental buildings in Wynwood and other parts that are sort of sitting there. And it's causing rents to come down there, which is actually a good thing for the city. But are you ever worried about overbuilding, where people get so excited and they feel like this growth is just going to continue and continue, and you're left with a lot of sort of inventory?
So first, I want to see where you get the statistics on the commercial prices and vacancy rates, because we just had somebody right now in the audience, I don't know if he's out there somewhere, who's building a building on Alton and 5th, who told me he was getting north of $150 a square foot net for commercial space. So from what I hear, the occupancy rates are extremely high, much higher than every other city in America, and the prices are extremely high. So that's a good, like you said, it's a good and a bad thing, because high prices, as long as the companies can afford it, is good. When it drives vacancy rates, it's not as good. In terms of overbuilding, look, I was on the city commission when 2008 and 2009 happened, right? When the big bubble burst and there was a glut of condos and people said, oh my God, Miami has a 10-year oversupply, and it was absorbed in 24 months. So I think that the demand for the city is so strong that I never worry about oversupply. I actually worry much more about undersupply that has driven prices up a little bit.
And we, like many other developers who've gone down to Miami, we have Amir, who is in the audience, and he just built a commercial office building. What kind of rents are you hoping to get in that commercial office building in Miami Beach? 200? But what kind of rents are you hoping to get there? I can't hear you. Wow, $150 to $175 a square foot.
By the way, that's not even the best part. It's $150 to $175. What did you underwrite it at? What did you underwrite it at? That's right, 200 a foot gross, because you were talking 150 net, but you underwrote it at $70 a foot. Obviously, costs have gone up a little bit since you underwrote the project, since you financed it, but that means you're 100% in the money day one.
Well, Mayor Suarez, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. Joining us today. Any final words? Any message? You have an audience of 1,000 people, or over 1,000 people, standing room only. Most of them are here living in New York. What message do you have for these guys?
Move to Miami. We want you and we love you. It's all right.